Hello, everyone, and welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the Policy Office at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another session of the NSF Virtual Grants Conference. I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover the work of the NSF Office of the Inspector General, and this session will be presented by Jeremy Hall, Dwayne Meadows, Brian McCarthy, and Matias Ortiz.
Thank you for attending the discussion for the Office of Inspector General portion of the June 2023 Grants Conference. My name is Jeremy Hall. I'm an audit manager with NSF OIG. I've worked in the Office of Audits since 2014, and now I'll hand it over to my colleagues for their introductions.
Hello, my name is Matias Rosner Ortiz. I'm an IT auditor, and now I'm going to pass it to my next colleague.
Hi, my name is Brian McCarthy. I'm a special agent criminal investigator with the Office of Inspector General. You hand this off to Dwayne, my associate.
Hello, I'm Dwayne Meadows. I joined the Office of the Inspector General just a year and a half ago after many years in academia as a biology professor, and then as a grants program officer and endangered species biologist for the National Marine Fisheries Service. Before finding and applying for my current job, I wasn't very familiar with what an Office of Inspector General was or what they do. So we'll start there. We're an independent office of the agency. We promote efficiency and effectiveness and economy in the operations of the agency. We do that by preventing and detecting fraud, waste, and abuse in agency programs and operations. We have full access to agency records, and we also have subpoena power to get other records that we might not have direct access to. We report to the head of the agency, that is the National Science Board, and also directly to Congress. In the rest of this presentation, what we're going to do is describe exactly how our office does some of those functions and how we interact with various NSF-supported organizations during audits and investigations. We'll conclude the presentation with some case study examples and then have time for questions. To learn more, you can visit our webpage here. Other contacts we'll have provided at the end, and you'll get a copy of this slide deck at the end. Now back to Matias.
Thank you. So what do we do in the Office of Inspector General? We have two main sides of our house, an Office of Investigations and an Office of Audits, where I work. We do a lot of audits where the awardee institution is the focus. We call these the external audits, and we also conduct audits of NSF's programs to identify ways to improve systems and operations. We call those the internal audits. Sometimes to really understand the challenges awardees are facing in a given program, we have to conduct audit work on specific awards at the awardee institution. We've been calling those hybrid audits, and we've recently done those involving the established program to simulate competitive research, also known as EPSCoR, and Graduate Research Fellowship Program, GRFP programs. I'm going to focus my discussion today on our external audits of specific awardees, single audit, and quality control assurance reviews, as these are the functions that are probably of most interest to this audience of NSF award recipients. Additionally, as part of our mission to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, we conduct outreach presentations to the research community at educational institutions, conferences, and other meetings. Just like today, OIG investigators, auditors, and attorneys provide education about recognizing and preventing fraud, administering federal funds, and promoting responsible conduct of research. Next slide, please. As we approach each fiscal year, we come up with an audit plan. There are, of course, a number of audits we are required to do by legislation, which you can see above in orange. And then the more discretionary part is generally based on consideration of a number of factors. First, the ones you see in green, then the blue square, and then the dark blue, ultimately leading to the completed plan. And for the next slide, let's talk about the typical audits and reviews that you may be called upon to participate in. For the external incurred costs audits, in a given year, we could typically complete 20 to 24 external audits. In October, we just sent out engagement memos for 10 new audits. Most are done by independent public accountant, IPA firms, on their contract to us. These audits are not just a review of incurred costs on a single award. Instead, the auditors look at all costs claimed on NSF awards during the audit scope. The auditors use data analytics on the general ledger to identify risk areas across the institution. A typical incurred cost audit will first have a review of financial systems and expenditures, and also compare drawdowns to the accounting system. We issue the final reports to the auditees and NSF with recommendations for the specific institutions. As I mentioned earlier, we also have been doing a few audits of awardees each year as part of the program-specific audits, such as of EPSCoR or GRFP. These often focus on areas specific to helping us understand where awardees might need more guidance in a unique aspect of a given program. Now for single audit reviews, as you all know, award recipients that spend $750,000 US or more of federal funds in a year must obtain a single audit, which is an important oversight tool. We review the quality of single audits of NSF award recipients for which NSF has audit cognizance. Generally, those institutions that receive the majority of their federal funding from NSF. We also review other award recipients when we have concerns about NSF-related information contained in the single audit reports. Our reviews determine if the audits comply with federal requirements and professional audit standards. We use checklists developed by the Council of the Inspectors Generals on Integrity and Efficiency, CIGIE or CIGIE, to conduct our reviews. We also do quality control reviews of the auditor's work. These may include a review of source documentation provided during the prior audit testing. Our quality assurance work helps to ensure the single audits can be relied on by government agencies and pass-through entities as part of their awardee monitoring work. And that concludes my portion talking about the Office of Audits. I am now going to pass the presentation over to my colleague, Jeremy Hall.
Thank you, Matias. Now that we've talked about the types of audits, let's talk about the risk model used to select our audits. Every year as we're putting together our annual plan, we update and run our external audit risk model. NSF awards about 12,000 new awards annually and manages more than 56,000 active awards. We are an office of about 35 people and we can't audit everything. So we have developed this risk model to help us focus our resources and select institutions to audit. The basic steps include gathering the universe of NSF awards, defining the population of awardees as we typically select an auditee, not a specific award. And then once we select an auditee, we test cost claims on NSF awards for a given scope and period of time. The model is based on multiple factors, internal ones like number and value of NSF awards, and external ones such as single audit findings. We put all this information together to help us in selecting institutions to audit. Similar to the external audit risk model, we have a single audit selection process. For auditee 2020 year ends, there were more than 39,000 single audits, which included $6.2 billion in NSF expenditures. Of those, 75 fell under NSF cognizant or oversight responsibility and received a desk review. NSF OIG aims to select 2 to 3 single audits per year for a quality control review. We consider auditing firm characteristics such as volume and risk exposure of NSF funds in determining which institution to select. Additionally, the Governmental Audit Quality Center, GAQC, promotes the importance of quality governmental audits and the value of such audits to purchasers of governmental audit services. GAQC is a voluntary membership center for CPA firms and state audit organizations that perform governmental audits. Being a member of GAQC lowers the risk score for auditors because it's an indicator that the firm is taking additional steps to improve the quality of their work. We have found through our work that the member firms tend to have fewer audit quality deficiencies. This slide takes us through the step-by-step process through our audit. The typical audit process takes about a year from the engagement letter to the final report. The OIG initiates the audit with an engagement letter to the auditee. This letter defines the objectives and scope of the audit. An entrance conference is then held to answer any questions the auditee may have. The audit team spends most of its time in the fieldwork stage, which involves reviewing supporting documents and holding interviews. After fieldwork, any potential findings are provided to the auditee in an informal discussion draft report. A formal exit conference is held to discuss the results of the audit. Audit results and final recommendations are communicated to the auditee at this meeting. As the audit nears its end, the official draft report is issued, and the auditee typically has 30 days to provide a formal written response to the report. The auditee's response to the official draft report is included in its entirety in an appendix of the final report. The last step is to issue the final report. It is sent to the award recipient, NSF, and Congress. All reports are posted to our website, oig.nsf.gov. If your single audit is part of our quality assurance review, that's a faster process than what I just described. It usually involves 2 weeks of on-site work. Our goal is a 3-month review process from the start of on-site work to issuance of the final report. Resulting letters and reports are provided to awardees, auditors, federal funding agencies, and when applicable, pass-through entities. This is the last slide before we hand it over to our colleagues in investigations. It highlights 2 recent audit reports of interest. The first is the promising practices for NSF award management. This report is a capstone report based on 18 recently completed audits. It highlights the most common audit findings and suggestions for how to improve compliance in those areas. The report is intended to help members of the recipient community identify means to strengthen award management practices and to improve overall stewardship of federal funds across NSF award recipient population. The second report is the capstone report, EPSCoR recipients need stronger oversight and controls. This report is a result of nearly 3 years of audit work we did on the EPSCoR program, both at NSF and several awardees. The report summarizes 3 key issues we identified at multiple EPSCoR recipients and associated suggestions intended to help EPSCoR recipient community address them. Specifically, we found a need for EPSCoR recipients to strengthen internal controls and oversight related to assessing and monitoring subrecipient risk, charging costs to support summer research programs, and implementing new accounting systems. You can find both of these reports and all of our other audit reports on our website, oig.nsf.gov. Thank you for your attention, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues to tell you more about OIG investigations.
The Office of Investigations is tasked with the detection and prevention of fraud within the NSF programs. Our office is comprised of criminal investigators or special agents, investigative scientists, and investigative attorneys. We derive our authority from the Inspector General Act of 1978, which authorizes us to conduct criminal, civil, and/or administrative investigations related to the NSF programs. While this gives us a broad mission, our primary role is first and foremost as finders of fact. What this simply means is we do not independently make the decision to prosecute, whether criminally or civilly, nor do we take a direct administrative action on our own. Instead, we present our information either to the Department of Justice or to the NSF in administrative matters, and it is they who determine the actions to take. Essentially, in a criminal case, the burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, we need to reach 99.99% positive proof that the allegations are supported. Whereas in a civil, the burden is merely a preponderance of the evidence, 51% or more. Just simply have to get over the hump of whether or not a crime had occurred. And then administratively, we will write a report recommending that NSF take some sort of action, also based on the preponderance of the evidence. Next slide, please. Most cases we work are what are referred to commonly as white-collar crimes, such as the ones listed on this slide. Generally speaking, Title 18 of the United States Code is our Bible, if you will, and it outlines what each crime is and the elements needed to prove that a crime occurred. We'll touch on some of those later, but to mention a few that you see here, as to conflicts of interest, To protect the integrity of the grants panel reviews, as well as to ensure the award process is fair, unbiased, and the money goes to the best project. This could involve bribes, kickbacks in return for selecting that awardee, similar conflicts. We look into duplicative funding, such as getting grants from different agencies to do the same research. This can also include a failure to fully disclose other funding in the current and pending support, up to and including institutional or foreign funding. Abuse of government funds, spending the money on personal items or activities such as personal trips, cars, credit card bills, or even plagiarism. I'll pass this off to Dwayne for more on that.
Thank you, Brian. As you can see from this slide, we get allegations from a number of sources. Grant PIs and co-PIs, program officers from within NSF, review panelists, university administrators like some of you all, other collaborators. Interestingly, as you can see, ex-spouses, ex-partners, people that have disgruntled relationships, and that sort of thing. Anyone can confidentially contact the Office of the Inspector General. The best way to do that is by clicking on our red-orange report waste, fraud, waste, or abuse button at the top of our webpage. Next slide, please. Here, I want to talk about the investigative process a little bit in some detail. After we get an allegation, what we do is first review that allegation to determine if there's some sort of NSF link through a project, funding, staff, that sort of thing. If there is an NSF link, our primary job then, as Brian said, is to fact find. And we do that by reviewing records, interviewing knowledgeable people, issuing subpoenas, and possibly even issuing search warrants in criminal matters. We also can refer matters to our audits colleagues or another agency if there's funding from other agencies involved. I work on research misconduct, fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism issues in grant proposals or in performing awarded grants. This is another type of grant fraud. And by regulation, our office handles those allegations as an administrative matter for the foundation. In the case of research misconduct, we typically refer investigations to the university, though, that's involved, as that's one of the regulatory obligations and uses of your indirect funds. To do that, you have the information and resources often at your fingertips for some of these issues. For civil and criminal matters, we refer those to U.S. Attorney's Office. In many of our administrative investigations, we draft a report and refer the matter to NSF for adjudication. As Brian said, we don't do that ourselves. In all of these types of investigations, our goal is to protect the interests of the federal government and the funds of the U.S. taxpayer. I want to talk briefly about other sorts of administrative cases that we work on. As I said, the main type of administrative matter that we handle are research misconduct cases. These are governed by this regulation that I mentioned, which defined research misconduct as falsification and or fabrication of data and plagiarism. Other types of cases we investigate outside of research misconduct are various conflicts of interest, violations of the confidentiality of NSF's merit review process, or other violations by NSF-funded researchers or institutions of various rules that we have in place, including those on human subjects, vertebrate animals, all those sorts of things. We also investigate whistleblower retaliation claims, which we'll discuss a little bit more later on in the presentation. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Brian, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about civil and criminal cases specifically.
As mentioned earlier, the Title 18 of the U.S. Code defines what constitutes a federal crime. Shown here on this slide are a few of the most frequently violated statutes we encounter. I'll highlight some of these now. We can go through some case studies later on where you'll see exactly how some of these bad actors have violated these laws. As with research, the devil is often in the details. In our case, we seek to determine exactly what did the person or company say they would do and didn't, or what did they do that they weren't supposed to. Focusing on some of the largest bubbles here, we have the criminal false statements or false claims, often referred to or referenced as the Martha Stewart example, where Martha Stewart was being looked into for insider trading and they couldn't make that case criminally. Instead, the Department of Justice was able to charge her and prove that she had lied to federal agents, and she subsequently was imprisoned and suffered her fate for the criminal false statements more so than the underlying. On the civil false claim side, simply certifying something is true when it wasn't, or said that it took place when it didn't. Those cases really are all about monetary damages and recoveries. Significantly, in a civil false claims finding there, the damages are typically trebled, meaning if it was a $100,000 grant fraud and it's proven to have been fraud in its entirety, that's a $300,000 penalty. And then the wire fraud, mail fraud clauses, it's not just about literally wiring money or sending something from your bank to elsewhere. It's literally any action that furthers a crime via the internet or U.S. Postal Service or electronic communications. Often you'll hear of somebody pleading guilty to a mail fraud or wire fraud case. Basically what happened is more than likely a more serious crime had occurred, but the subject worked out a deal with the United States Attorney for lesser charges and took a smaller sentence rather than catching a actual fraud case. And then there's also the charge of conspiracy. To be charged with conspiracy, really all that is required is that two or more parties collude together to commit a crime, and at least one single overt act to further the scheme by either party or any party has taken place. And in a conspiracy, all parties are charged equally and are subject to the same penalties. Next slide. The OIG does not operate autonomously. Rather, it takes a village to work this case. Many of our cases are worked jointly with other agencies, such as the NIH, NASA, Department of Energy, and others, because these also fund cutting-edge research and development in similar fields of study. In the matter of criminal or civil investigations, we also work very closely with the DOJ in seeking guidance and cooperation in prosecution or reaching a civil outcome, such as settlement agreements, fines, reimbursements, etc. In matters declined by the Department of Justice, and occasionally in conjunction with those matters, we'll often refer our findings to the NSF for consideration of administrative action, up to and including a suspension, termination of award, suspension or debarment of a PI, and other non-judicial remedies. It should be noted, though, that suspension and debarment is usually for a defined period of time rather than indefinite. Next slide. The next few slides, we're going to go into a few examples of some case studies. In this, the NSF's jurisdiction basically is we follow the NSF funds. We run approximately 100 civil or criminal investigations at any given time throughout the agency. And if you want to read more on these beyond just these case studies today, you can always refer to our semi-annual report to Congress, comes out biannually. In this case, the NSF OIG utilized an outside CPA firm to audit the university. In preparation for the audit, and subsequently in response to the preliminary audit findings, university employees and administrations fabricated time and effort records and other records and provided them to the auditors. Essentially, the research compliance coordinator, who had noticed some documents were missing, directed the PIs to submit backdated personal activity reports based on the salary amounts that had been reportedly paid. They then directed the staff to gather and create these 13 specific timesheets and backdate them. It was also discovered during our investigation that certain university administrators had tasked this research coordinator with providing the missing PARs. The research coordinator also ensured that her administrative colleagues were kept apprised of her efforts, referred to as corrected time and effort forms. Sometimes these forms were backdated, sometimes signature dates were omitted, sometimes the research coordinator corrected the documents by making changes on them, like such as changing a 9 to an 8 or a 3 to an 8, etc. Sometimes the research coordinator even used previously completed PARs, photocopying them, literally using whiteout, and typing or writing in different dates. In all, we've identified $540,000 in questioned costs, charged with submission of fabricated documents and undocumented salary costs, which constitutes a violation of the Civil False Claims Act. Ultimately, the government reached a $1.17 million settlement with the university, plus a 5-year compliance plan. The university compliance coordinator also pled guilty to 1 count of fraud related to the original certificate or writings under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1018, and was sentenced to 1 year probation for that misdemeanor charge. And the only reason the university compliance coordinator was charged with a misdemeanor rather than a felony was because she didn't personally benefit from this scheme. Next slide, please. In this case, the university had a pattern and practice of paying students to perform unrelated PhD-required teaching assistant duties, and then charging the expenses to the federal research grants. Because teaching assistant roles and duties were unrelated to the award itself, they were therefore unallowable under federal grant requirements. This case was brought to the U.S. Attorney's Office and was accepted for civil prosecution. A settlement was reached totaling $3.75 million to resolve allegations the university had violated the Civil False Claims Act. According to information provided by the university, a teaching assistant fund was ultimately put into place at the university to correct the problem, and a dedicated fund of money insulated federal grants of students being paid from research grants to perform their TA duties through paying those students from that fund rather than the federal grants. Next slide. In this case, the PI was convicted of conspiring to commit federal grant fraud, making false statements, and obstruction by falsification. In this case, the PI had undisclosed foreign funding in the U.S. grant applications and submissions to the university as well. The PI did make disclosures to the university regarding travel and conferences. However, more could have been done, despite there being several red flags. In fact, even though the university had disallowed some of his activities, he went ahead and did them anyhow. In this case, there were several red flags that apparently were missed. There was a pattern of the individual putting in for conflict of interest that were not allowed. There were sub-awards to the university that were not paid. And in essence, the university simply could have followed up more to avoid having problems. In fact, while a professor, this PI had actually founded and served as an officer for a separate company that was solely funded through federal grants. He also simultaneously held an outside position at a Chinese institution. He caused this company to submit fraudulent grant proposals to the NSF for research he knew had already been completed in China. And when subpoenaed for the records, he provided falsified timesheets to the OIG. Ultimately, the PI was found guilty of conspiracy, 3 counts of false statements, and obstruction by falsification. He was sentenced to time served, including 3 months pre-trial because he was judged a flight risk and was on house arrest, and 2 years of supervisory release. Next slide. On this slide, we'll read about a university in which multiple NSF awards were made for high energy particle physics research. Without adequate documentation, the university had approved advances and made other payments using NSF award funds for such things as salary, equipment, and travel. The university did this despite knowing at least some of the funds were actually being used to pay the professor's personnel expenses. Despite being aware of the misuse of funds and the inadequate documentation, the university continued to fail to notify NSF of significant problems for more than 2 years. Ultimately, we reached a $2.7 million settlement to resolve allegations under the Civil False Claims Act that the university had failed to account for NSF research funds properly. And the university entered a 5-year compliance plan with the NSF. Next slide.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to talk about a couple of case studies having to do with administrative research misconduct investigations. The first case here, I'll talk about, well, let me first start with a little more detail about research misconduct. To find research misconduct in an investigation, we have to show that there's a significant departure from the accepted practices of the relevant research community. That's the regulatory language that says we have to show something is being done unusual in this regard. The research misconduct itself has to be done intentionally or knowingly or recklessly. That is, it's not just done as some sort of honest error or mistake. And finally, we have to prove the allegation by this preponderance of the evidence standard that Brian mentioned before, that is this 51% likely that someone committed the act or acts. So in this particular first case, it's an NSF-supported graduate student who falsified data, plagiarized another researcher's dissertation, and committed other ethical violations in a manuscript, which 2 journals actually published, interestingly. In this case, the subject submitted manuscript without the co-author's knowledge or consent. They submitted the manuscript to 7 journals simultaneously. They falsified a journal submission page using false email addresses for the co-authors. The student blamed a hostile work environment, improper supervision, the lack of responsible and ethical conduct of research training, which university records showed they had actually taken, advisors' lack of interest, a whole number of excuses. The student basically felt they deserved publication after synthesizing some chemical compounds for their advisor. As I mentioned earlier, we often refer these to the university. In this case, the university did the bulk of the investigation, concluded that there was research misconduct, both the falsification and the plagiarism from the other dissertation. The student was dismissed by the university. The publications were retracted. The university itself made some changes to their student training going forward. That's a nice outcome that we like to see. And worth noting for folks here, starting soon, the requirement for responsible and ethical conduct of research training that used to be just for NSF-funded students and postdocs, et cetera, going forward will include essentially all NSF-funded folks, including faculty and other permanent staff. In this particular case, the outcomes were based on our recommendations to the agency, 3 years of debarment, so no federal funding for this person for 3 years, and 6 years of certifications and assurances. That is, we often have outcomes in cases like this where someone is required to certify that their proposals and applications don't contain any research misconduct, plagiarism, falsification, and the university itself or other institutions required to also review those sorts of applications and provide their own assurances that they've investigated and that there is no such research misconduct in those proposals. So the 6 years, essentially 3 years of debarment, they can't really apply anyways. And then an extra 3 years beyond that, they're essentially in a kind of a probation, if you will, where they're allowed to apply, but have to go through these certifications and assurances, and NSF agreed. The next slide has the next case that I'll give you as another example. Here's an actual faculty member who's a PI who served as a reviewer on an NSF panel, found some ideas that they liked, copied those ideas from a proposal that they had reviewed, and copied it into their own proposal, which then they submitted to the agency. Again, similar sort of investigation where we involve the university. You guys have to protect your own interests as well. In this case, the PI admitted the copying. The university found them guilty of research misconduct and required that this person then submit plagiarism reports to the university for any proposals that they were going to submit for 3 years. Same requirement for any publications, and required additional training. We then looked at protecting federal interests in this case, made additional recommendations of a research misconduct finding, and recommended a 2-year debarment for this individual. And in this case, 5 years of those certifications and assurances. So again, 3 years beyond the debarment period. And we also often include a provision where the subject is prohibited from serving NSF in other capacities. So serving on review panels, serving as an advisor or consultant, or working as a rotator NSF accepted and implemented those recommendations in this case and also returned a pending proposal that had not yet been decided upon. They returned that without review due to the research misconduct findings, so it can affect other things that are currently active as well. I also want to mention that our office and program recently completed a report based on an analysis of 10 years of plagiarism data in cases that we've investigated over that time period. And that's the bulk of our cases. About 80% are related to plagiarism. We found that subjects are often employed in junior academic positions, assistant professors especially. So this addition of the new responsible and ethical conduct of research training requirement for faculty that soon goes into place will be helpful in, we think, preventing these sorts of misconduct. I'll provide a link to that report for you all. Next slide, please. Final points here, I guess, kind of wrapping up these case studies. If you have questions related to compliance with grant terms, allowable costs, other matters, best practice is really ask your program officer, talk to them, get their advice in writing and follow it. We recommend training for anyone that handles any sorts of federal awards, PIs, administrative staff, financial staff in the grants office or in contracts and other awards. And again, as I mentioned, we'll have this expanded responsible and ethical conduct of research training requirement for faculty going forward. And obviously, don't do things that are against the rules. Don't provide the inaccurate information or false certifications. Brian's talked about those kind of cases. Finally, to wrap up our presentation, I'm going to shift gears and talk into another important investigative function that our office engages in, and that is whistleblower protections. If I could have the next slide. A core value of our Office of Inspector General is protecting NSF employees, contractors, award recipients, and subrecipients who step forward to identify potential wrongdoing, any of the sorts of things that we've talked about today. Federal law prohibits retaliation for providing information that is reasonably believed to provide evidence of a violation of law, rule, or the regulations we've been talking about, gross mismanagement or gross waste of funds, abuses of authority, or things that lead to a substantial and specific danger to public health and safety. NSF contractors and grantees are protected if they make their disclosures to their management, to the government, or to Congress. We have a lot more information. It's a bit of a complicated subject about these protections on our webpage that we'll show you a link again in a second at the end of the presentation. If I could have the next slide, the law also requires that we have a whistleblower ombudsman. That person for NSF is William Bill Kilgallen. He's a senior advisor in our Office of Investigations. He can provide additional information about prohibitions against retaliation for these kinds of protected disclosures and the rights and remedies you have if such have occurred. Please note, though, that the law does not allow the whistleblower protection coordinator, this ombudsman, Mr. Kilgallen, to act as a legal representative or agent or advocate for you, but they can help you navigate the process. Finally, if I could have the next slide, keep in touch with us if you have other questions or you want to report wrongdoing. Here's a graphic showing the hot red button where you can make those reports to our office. We also have phone numbers, emails, the website address here, all in one place. And we even have a Twitter. Please don't use the Twitter account to tweet allegations to us. That's a little bit too public. We prefer those to come to us directly through other means. Again, you'll have the link to this presentation available afterwards if you want to come back to this information. And our emails are at the front end in the final slide of the presentation. If I could have that. Again, the four of us, thank you for this overview of the work of the NSF Office of Inspector General. I hope it's been useful to you, and we look forward to answering any of your questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to welcome back our presenters for this session. And we're going to get into some of your questions. We have about 15 minutes to answer questions. So we're going to take the ones that have come in, and maybe we'll get to more if you can submit them into the Q&A. So the first question is asking about this January 2022 report about how, and asking how indirect costs are applied incorrectly. Jeremy Hall, I think you wanted to go ahead and answer that one.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. I pasted the link to the report in the chat. It's a very good report, seeing that I think the poll said 74% of the people attending are research administrators. And this finding, or the summary in this report, essentially deals with when a proposal is submitted, there's a box for the indirect cost rate, and the negotiated indirect cost rate is established by the cognizant agency for a period of a year, and maybe up to 3 years. And what a common finding in a lot of our audits is that a proposal will be submitted and it'll be a little while before it's awarded. And the appropriate negotiated indirect cost rate to use is the rate at the time that the award letter goes out. And there's a common finding, and we see that the old rate is, from the proposal is usually included. I think from the auditee sense, it's usually a question of what's the issue, because the rate's usually higher, therefore you're underclaiming costs to NSF. And to kind of explain it from our side, we just want to see that internal controls are in place to ensure that the appropriate indirect cost rate is applied at the time that the grant letter went out. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thanks. Let's move on to the next one, which is asking that if there are those that are found to be in violation of NSF policies, can they still be reviewers? Can, I suppose, also submit proposals or be hired as NSF staff?
Thanks, Jeremy. I'll take this one. Appreciate the question. I know it came in earlier, and I did talk about a variety of sanctions as we kind of went through some of the case studies, but I wanted to kind of highlight that the regulations basically specify a range of potential sanctions that the agency can impose that can range from essentially a letter of reprimand, either to the individual or the institution, actually, if there's something involving administrative oversight. Up to this debarment that we talked about a few times. And so the direct question, I guess, is that it depends, but as you might have heard in some of the case studies, that some of the sanctions do involve prohibitions on serving as a reviewer, as a consultant, as a rotator, or IPA with the agency. And so, yes, there can be those sanctions for violations, for the more serious violations, or sort of medium to more serious violations of policies, depending on the agency. So that's definitely true. And if I could, Jeremy, there's another kind of related question from Jay Bailey. Sure. Here also about, in this case, specifically about repercussions, I guess, or sanctions for the supervising PI in case 5. This was the case that involved the graduate student and doing both plagiarism and false data. And so 2 things I want to emphasize. One is that those kind of sanctions can come either from us or from the institution. There are cases like this where the student has actually done a pretty, I'm not sure good is the right word, devious attempt at hiding their fabrication of data, that is sort of consistently meeting with their advisor. The advisor seems to be doing their job, trying to probe a little bit about what's going on. It looks like the person's working in the lab. And yet at the end of the day, there's falsification that occurred. The student wanted to get the right result or whatever the case may be. And so again, we can and have reprimanded the supervisor. Universities have imposed various sorts of training, mentoring, oversight, giving the mentor themselves or supervisor a mentor if they're a young faculty in mentoring. I had a very similar case to this one where, again, the grad student got away with it. The major professor tried to be diligent, but didn't find it. They had been awarded tenure, but it hadn't become effective. And the university actually withdrew the tenure offer based on the research misconduct of one of their students. So there can be very, very serious repercussions at both levels for a PI in a case involving a student.
Great, thank you, Dwayne.
Yes.
There's another question here asking about responsible and ethical conduct of research training, if there have been audits related to this, or if there are planned audits related to this requirement for our RECR.
I can take that one. I don't have any coverage over that. We just recently did our audit planning for the year, and I don't see anything on there. But as it becomes more of an issue, we'll pick it up. But Dwayne or Brian, do you have any input on that?
I can say we did look at responsible conduct of research and did a report. I don't know how many years ago it was now at the time, and have looked at the issue. So I think we do have an interest in it kind of long term. We don't have a formal plan for any sort of investigation, but we do kind of pay attention to what's happening with our cases. And if we expect to see maybe that these kind of issues change after the implementation. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that. Thanks.
Okay, the next question is asking whether the OIG would ever audit NSF's merit review process to determine its effectiveness. Is that something that the IG would get involved in?
I believe that's a question above my pay grade. I'll try my best to answer it. I believe we have the ability to do so. I think and this is my opinion, the ability to measure the effectiveness and define it in the audit scope might be the difficulty there. But I do see it within our ability to audit.
Okay. Next question is asking about a percentage of reports that result in no problems found.
I will also take that one. So on the majority of audits that I do, I will say we typically find a problem. It might not be huge. It might be something as small as the indirect cost rate, which we just discussed. But one of my recent audits, that was the only finding we had. So we tend to look at a wide range over a whole bunch of awards, and the issues might not always be incredibly large, but I believe most of my recent audit reports have had at least one finding.
Okay, so the next question is asking about NSF's 2-month policy and asking whether a PI can submit a proposal to NSF who's already being funded for 2 months. Can a PI submit another proposal to NSF with more time budgeted for effort? And I'll at least give the policy perspective on this, in that NSF does limit salary compensation to no more than 2 months in a given year. That being said, you can request more. You have to justify it in your budget justification, and it would need to be approved by an NSF program officer. So you can request more than 2 months, but you do need to justify it very well, and it needs to be approved by NSF before you could actually begin that effort. I don't know if the IG wants to have any other response on that one.
I think you did a great job of answering.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. The only other question here is asking about effort being charged on awards and what would constitute fraud on reporting effort.
I guess I can take that one. I think I referenced probably the first case study we did. In that case, it was fabricating a time and effort reports. Basically, backdating it, saying the work was done that wasn't actually done, mitigating the hours or the commitment that was made under the award to show that the PI either did or did not have an overextension of the amount of time they were able to participate. And then fabricating those documents, simply the backdating effect of it in this case was the problem. It wasn't ever tracked originally, and then for the audit purpose, it was backdated in and falsified and submitted as if they were contemporary.
Okay. The questions coming in here now as we're getting close. Let's see. Is moving salary from one award to another to meet EFR requirements considered fraud?
I'll take the audit perspective of this and then hand it over to the investigators for the fraud part. Any effort charged to an award should be directly applicable to that award. The work performed should be related to the award topic of research. And it sounds like moving some effort from one award to another doesn't meet that standards. And then for the fraud, I'll hand it over to my colleagues.
Yeah, no, exactly, Jeremy. I agree. You can't move, from my understanding, you cannot move from one award to another because it's allocated for that particular research purpose. You can reallocate it with the program officer's approval. You can reallocate it from one section of that award to another purpose within the award. But again, that has to be approved and justified at the NSF program officer.
Okay, next question is asking about an award that cites published research that was later retracted. Is there a responsibility for the PI to notify NSF about that? I don't know, maybe the terminology here, I'm not sure about what retracted means.
Yeah, I can answer this a little bit, I guess. Certainly at a submission stage, when an award is being evaluated, there may be a published research that's been retracted that is fundamental to the idea or the merit of the particular proposal and might affect a review, and you'd want to be upfront. I think we've got some new requirements. I can't speak for NSF, but as I recall, there are some changing requirements on being forthcoming about a variety of different things at all stages of the process that are a little new, but that's definitely a potential thing that you should, err, I think, on the side of caution with your program officer. After an award, maybe that's a little less of an issue. But there certainly may be some circumstances, and I would say, it never hurts to have a quick conversation with a program officer to make sure there's no concern on either side.
Okay, the last question that we have here is asking about policy exceptions, like I mentioned with the 2-month salary requirement. Should it be from the program office or the grants management specialist? And again, I'm going to go in and just give you the policy perspective on this. There, as part of the research terms and conditions, there's something called the prior approval matrix, and I'm going to put a link to it in the chat. And this identifies all the cases for not only NSF, but other participating research agencies of when you need to come into NSF and get approval for different items. So I'm gonna drop that into the chat here so that you can see that. Let's see. Next, I think we've got time for another couple of questions here. Are you aware of institutions moving away from effort certification systems to using monthly ledger verifications of after the fact cost approvals? And if those practices are acceptable under audit review?
So I believe I understand this question, and we go to many institutions and see effort certifications handled many ways. There's signed timesheets, but then depending on level of employee, it's even different. I believe what you're asking is appropriate to maybe take a broad range of time and certify after the fact. And if the criteria of what needs to be affirmed is all there, it should be appropriate. As long as it follows the policies laid out by your institution, we should be okay with it.
Okay. So we have, let's see, I think we have time for one more. And this question is saying we are put at odds with a program manager instructing the PI on grant issues. What suggestions do you have to help us get the message to the PI that the program director should not be providing this type of guidance directly? I guess if you're asking if the program director is providing incorrect information, I'm not sure what the nature of this question is. Actually, I don't know. Maybe Jeremy, do you able to decipher that a little? I can say that if you do have questions like this, policy-specific questions, you can always send them to policy@nsf.gov. What I would say is that if you have a question that is related to a specific award, you want to be in touch with the grants officer for that award, or the program officer for that award, and you'll find those in the award notice that you receive. That contact information is there for them. I'm going to, because we have limited time and we have more sessions this afternoon, I do want to wrap this up. I want to thank all of you, our panelists, for joining us for this session and Q&A today. Thank you all very much for attending. We hope to see you at future sessions. Thank you and take care. Bye-bye.